Hello, welcome to Module 11. Just as a reminder, your graduate project, you should be about halfway to almost finished with this project by this point in time. Just to make sure you're staying on track, make sure you follow that timeline. Let's go ahead and jump into our topic this week, which is spelling. Just a few facts. Approximately 26% of our all students have difficulty spelling words in English. This does include the whole population of students who are ELL, students who are special education students, students that are gifted and talented, even just regular general education students who are in the middle typically have difficulty with spelling. Many students with learning disabilities have trouble with spelling, and reading and spelling disabilities tend to coexist, although a student may only have a spelling disability, and that's quite normal. English in general is just very frustrating. There's a huge topic of, well, is it even important to teach this? Because with all the technology today, is it really important? Well, even if students are able to spell check, they still need to have an understanding of the words so that they know if it makes sense in order to communicate. So it's kind of one of those things you can't throw the baby out of the tub without the bathwater sort of thing. So you've got to kind of make sure that you are still directly instructing spelling, but incorporating that within their writing tasks seems to be the best bang for your buck to really make your students be aware of their spelling errors and to fix them because they will continue to make them. And not everything, even today, is all done on a computer. Students are still required to do something by hand. Every single time you go to the doctor's office, for example, you have to usually write your information down. And if you can't communicate that type of information correctly, you're going to have problems. So I always use that as a good example for my students. It's definitely something that they need to continue to work on. Okay, there are 26 different letters in our alphabet, 300 different letter combinations, 17 vowels, and 27 consonant phonemes. Over 500 spellings, to represent our phonemes. Is this really logical? Well, because we have an alphabetic writing system, we have a letter in a word that represents a sound in one way or another. And it is definitely developed over time, so we're going to take a look at that. Now, I'm not going to read all of these to you, just pointing out a few things that I thought was very interesting. Back in Old English, we didn't use the letters J, K, V, W, Q, or Z. And so if you really think about a lot of words that we use, if you take out those letters, that really limits our vocabulary and what we were able to communicate back at that period of time. It kind of reminds me of individuals who live in Hawaii because Hawaii does the same thing. They are missing out on key letters that they just don't have in their language. Middle English, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this is that the two sounds were made for the letter H. For example, like in cough with a GH, letters U and V were interchangeable. They could either be vowels or consonants, which I thought was really interesting. And one of the other things that I thought was really interesting before too is that they changed HW to actually be WH for those words because it's actually how it really sounds. So kind of thinking about how that was before probably was more difficult to spell back in these periods of time. Modern English was really stabilized over this period of time. There was a really reflecting a lot of Greek and Latin root and making it very consistent within multiple words using the same word patterns or word families. And actually, a dictionary was actually published of words in 1755 in modern English. There was a great vowel shift in the 1500s, and this is where a lot of, I think, our problems come from because students really have a difficulty with understanding the vowels and how they all work in words. If you think of just R-controlled vowels, is it OR? Is it UR? Is it IR? Is it AR? Etc. It's very difficult sometimes because they all sound the same to know which is which. So there's a lot of the stressing of different schwas and vowels at this period of time. And also, the goal was to really simplify things by making sure that there were more blends of words, such as with KN, GN, WR, MN, LK, MB, for example. English and spelling and American spellings aren't always the same, and definitely there's a lot of words that we use differently in both languages, even though it's the same kind of language, it's just different. So if you ever show your students anything from, for example, the UK or from Australia or things like that, you'll notice that even in print, a lot of words are just not the same, and that's because it's just either the way that they developed and used the words, which is confusing because it is English. Okay, how do we really make sense of all this? Well, it really is a good compromise. Our writing system is in place the way it is, and there's nothing really we can do about it but really teach our students that there are rules that play fair and there's words that don't play fair, and there are certain things that we can use in our tool bag to help make spelling a lot easier, such as knowing word families, such as understanding prefixes and suffixes, making sure we understand homonyms, and homophones and things like that. And also making sure that they visually can connect. And even I like to highlight and when I'm teaching spelling for my students when they're working on those different types of words where they can see similar spellings in multiple words that they know. There is logic to our spelling system. There's three main demands of spelling that our students have to be strong at to be good spellers. One is understanding the phonetic demand, where they actually spell a word the way it sounds. The semantic demand, where they spell words that are alike because they have the same meaning and they look the same way, such as hymn and hymnal. And then there's the etymological demand, which is spelling to reflect the origin of the word. And it's really interesting. I always love watching the spelling bee. Those kids that are on the National Spelling Bee just blow me away. But it's really always funny to me that they want to know the origin of the word. They want to know where did the word come from. Is it Latin? Is it Greek? Etc. And so it's really interesting about that is because if they find that out, they know what spelling patterns those languages are. And that shows a really advanced speller because they have all those rules memorized. Our typical students that we work with aren't at that level, so we just have to give them the general rules and help them as best we can to make those connections. As always, I always want to give you more tools for your toolbox, so there's a variety of different websites that can help your students. All right, so as we talked about last time, there's that development of the different stages of spelling, just like there is with writing. Students begin with just scribbling, then they go to forming letters, then they actually put the letters together to make a sound, and then last but not least, they're finally spelling, and they're really becoming automatic. Now, I know before I said with our lessons, for example, for your projects, we weren't going to work on the procedural, declarative, and conceptual, but it is important to know that this does apply in multiple areas of academics where procedural knowledge is being able to understand the rules and apply them in the correct order. There's the declarative knowledge, which is the automaticity of writing out your words, especially those high frequency words. And then there's the conceptual understanding of knowing where those different meanings and rules come from when spelling words, and it really influences how we spell. It's really important that we have a balanced spelling program. We would definitely want to have the direct instructions with spelling, incorporating the procedural, conceptual, and declarative, but making sure it's balanced and not having it stand alone. I think one mistake everybody thinks is there's no time to really teach spelling. Well, it's not hard to teach it if we actually integrate it within reading and writing, and even during spelling time, bring in those phonemic awareness skills that you're teaching in reading for them to apply to their spelling, for example. So it doesn't have to stand alone. What you need to know is general instructional approaches. You need to know word study strategies. There are tons of programs already out there that already help our students to do that. There's a lot of teaching activities and assessments that we can use for spelling. One of the best type of assessments that I think helps for our students who struggle with spelling is instead of it being an all or nothing approach, which is the way I was always taught with spelling, you either got it or you didn't get the word. But there would be times sometimes where I might switch around just one or two letters. I've got the same word, I just kind of got the letters mixed up, but for the most part, I spelled the word correctly. Usually back when I was in school, you still didn't get credit. So there are different ways of assessing your students to see where they're making those errors. Just like we've done error analysis in math, you can do error analysis in spelling. What is common that they're continuing to do when they're spelling? For example, the word there. They might understand the differences between the words, but they're just mixing up the letters in writing them. So I've seen spelling assessments where you can score the letters not only in the correct place, but in their correct sequence as well. So what are some instructional approaches? Well, there's a rule-based instruction, and it's not based on memorizing words, but learning the rules that we have to train with those untrainable words, excuse me. There's a linguistic approach, there's a phonetics approach, and it's really important that we only teach rules that work at least 75% of the time. If you're teaching a rule that happens very rarely, you're wasting your students' time and yours as well. There's function of the final silent E and knowing those. The rule for final silent E are here, and here's some examples. Also, number 2 is fixed and flow word list. In elementary, we want to have a frequency of use in writing lists, so they're using the words that they use all the time. That's important, not just spelling the lovely words just because happens to be that holiday. We want to really make our words very important and priority words that they have to take. Need to take a look at what are common misspelled words that students have, usually words like was, W-U-Z instead of W-W-A-S, for example. Basal word lists are great. Middle and secondary, we really have to work on those functional words to make them independent and make it relevant within their community where they can understand, especially our life skills students, where they need understanding of how to spell words or recognize words such as exit or entrance, things like that. Word study approaches, there's also a multisensory approach. There's all of these that are listed here: imitation, 5-step word strategy, self-questioning strategy, mnemonics for spelling. Whatever you do, the important thing is to make sure that you're only giving your students 6 to 12 words to practice at a time, constantly building and retesting and reviewing those words, of course. Explicit instruction is key. Sufficient practice and giving them correct feedback. Motivating the student to spell correctly. Having students work with one another to spell and use each other as a resource. Have them practice using dictionaries. It's as simple as even having the students, now that they have iPads in the classroom, utilizing those as well. And of course, the breaking apart words into smaller versions is really important, like unbreakable. They can clearly see each part and know how to spell each individual part. Makes it a lot easier rather than trying to think of the whole word at once. The Graham and Freeman word study approach is: you say the word, you write the word, you check the word by comparing it with model, you trace and say the word, write the word, form from memory and check, and then repeat the first 5 steps. So instead of just writing the word over and over and over again, there's a lot more to this process, and it seems to be beneficial. I've seen this help for some students, not necessarily all students, but it's a good approach. This is another technique where you can actually give them words but leave missing blanks where they keep making mistakes and help them to actually get to making that word completely independently. Imitation is where a teacher is going to provide an oral or a written model of the word and imitate it. The teacher provides feedback. You practice it until they can spell without the model. A spelling probe is administered, and then make sure that they're not using non-phonetic words to spell, because that can really confuse them. Spelling self-questioning strategy. Do you know the word? How many syllables do you hear? That's the big one for your students. If they can break the word down, they can most likely be able to spell the different parts. Does the word look right? When I finish, can I tell myself that I've worked hard on these words? There's more spelling program websites that I've given you here and here as well. And as we talked about, there's the different types of spelling assessment. Ames Web is one of my favorites, as you know. There's a lot of them, but also the Brigance and the Test of Written Spelling for norm reference are great as well. You can use informal spelling. You can take it directly from a writing piece. You don't even have to make them take a spelling test. Take it straight from what they've already written. And once again, use that error analysis. Look at the words and see what they're commonly making mistakes on and instruct towards that. Once again, those curriculum-based assessments are fantastic to see what rules they are or are not following. Making sure you set plans for your students and reviewing short-term objectives to get them to become better spellers. And the last resource I wanted to give you today is, this is one of my favorites, and I know it's very elementary, but it's really great once again, because if you don't build a great foundation up until 8th grade, students typically struggle, so you might have to come back down to this level. But I really enjoy the Rebecca Sentence spelling model because it really uses priority words and core words they absolutely have to know and implement it directly within their writing. And even the spelling test is a closed paragraph where they're actually implementing the word and putting it correctly into a piece of writing. Makes it better than just a here's your 10 words for a Friday test, and these words continue to get repeated. So I absolutely love this program and would highly recommend it. Your password, before I forget, for this week is the word persuasive, so please send me the word persuasive via email. And if you have any questions or have any other thoughts, feel free to share with me this week. And all assignments, of course, are due next Tuesday. Thanks so much.